My name is Layla Vance. I'm 29 years old, a sergeant in the United States Army, and I should be on base right now. Instead, I'm in a bank in Portland, and my stepfather, Greg, has his hand wrapped around my wrist, pinning it to the armrest of the chair. His fingers are digging into my skin, and I can feel my own pulse throbbing under his grip. Don't make a scene, Layla, he hisses through clenched teeth. My mother sits next to me, arms crossed, her face a tight mask of frustration. Stop being so dramatic. We are just trying to help you understand your responsibilities. My responsibilities? Nearly $60,000 in fraudulent debt that was threatening to destroy my military career. They thought I would just quietly take the hit like I always had. But they made one fatal mistake. If you've ever been treated like a backup plan instead of a priority by your own family, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready to see what happens when a soldier decides the most brutal front line is the one back home. After my mother's words, your responsibilities, the small glass-walled office at the U.S. Bank fell into a thick, suffocating silence. The air, already sterile and chilled by the relentless hum of the air conditioner, grew heavy. All I could hear was the distant, rhythmic click-clack of keyboards from the main floor and the frantic drumming of my own heart. I kept my eyes fixed on Janet, the bank's loan officer. She was a woman in her late 40s with sensible glasses and a no-nonsense haircut, and she was turning the pages of the loan documents with a deep furrow in her brow. She wasn't just looking at them, she was dissecting them. Her professional face gave nothing away, but the sheer intensity of her focus gave me a strange, unfamiliar feeling. I felt seen. For the first time all day, someone was actually looking at the truth on the paper, not the twisted version of reality my mother and Greg were desperately trying to paint. Under the cold, unforgiving glare of the fluorescent lights, the cheap ink of the forged signatures seemed to scream. Greg couldn't stand the silence. He started tapping his foot against the leg of his chair, a rapid, anxious rhythm that I knew all too well. It was his tell, the little drumbeat of a lie in progress. He cleared his throat, about to launch into another explanation, another story about a business opportunity that was just about to pay off, but Janet looked up before he could start. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her glasses, were as sharp as surgical steel. She adjusted her frames with a deliberate push of her index finger, her gaze locking directly onto mine, completely bypassing my mother and Greg. She spoke with a terrifying calm, a precision that cut through the tension like a razor. "Sergeant Vance," she said, her tone level and firm. "This signature is a clear forgery. It's not even close." Greg sputtered, a sound like a failing engine. "Now wait a minute, I'm sure there's just a misunderstand." Janet didn't even look at him. She simply raised one hand, a silent, unyielding gesture that stopped him mid-sentence. Her eyes never left mine. She continued, her voice gaining a hard, undeniable edge. "And this isn't the only loan." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the room, letting the truth suck the remaining oxygen from the air. "I've been looking through the system while we've been talking. There are others, several others." She took a slow, deep breath, the kind you take before delivering a verdict. "This is systematic fraud, Sergeant. You don't need a lawyer." She leaned forward slightly. "You need the police." In that instant, Greg's carefully constructed mask didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 pieces. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by the raw, wild-eyed panic of a cornered animal. He shot to his feet so abruptly his chair screeched against the floor. "We're leaving," he announced, grabbing my mother's arm. He tried to project authority, but his voice was thin and brittle. But Janet was faster. Her hand was already on the phone on her desk. "Please, sit down, sir," she said, her voice dropping into a command tone that I recognized from my own drill sergeants. "I've already alerted security. They'll be here any second." But the thing that truly broke me, the thing that inflicted a wound deeper than any financial debt, was my mother's reaction. She didn't rush to my side. She didn't look at me with horror or concern. She turned to Greg, her face contorted with angry disappointment, and hissed in a furious whisper, "I told you, Greg. I told you she wouldn't stay quiet. She wasn't worried about me. She wasn't worried about the crime, or the betrayal, or the daughter whose life they had just torpedoed. She was worried that their plan had failed. In that moment, I wasn't her daughter. I was a complication. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, flashed in my mind. A quote from an old commanding officer during a briefing in Afghanistan. "In a crisis," he'd said, "look for the helpers. There's always one." Janet, this quiet, unassuming woman in a polyester blouse, was my helper. The one person in a building full of strangers who chose to see the truth. The arrival of 2 Portland police officers shifted the energy in the room instantly. The chaotic, frayed tension was replaced by a calm, procedural order. They were professional, their blue uniforms a stark symbol of the authority Greg had so arrogantly dismissed. They listened patiently to Janet, their faces grim as they reviewed the documents she'd laid out. One of them, a tall officer with kind eyes, then turned to me. He didn't look at me like a problem or a victim. He looked at me like a fellow professional. "Sergeant," he said, his voice laced with genuine respect, "we're very sorry you're going through this." It was the first validation I had received all day. Not pity, validation. It was a simple sentence, but it felt like a lifeline. When the other officer moved to put Greg in handcuffs, the dam of my mother's composure finally broke. She let out a wail, a theatrical cry of despair. "Layla, do something," she pleaded, lunging toward me. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Please, he's your father." This time, I pulled my arm back, a sharp, clean movement. The heat of her grip vanished, leaving my skin cold. "You already did something, Mom," I said. My voice was level, devoid of all emotion. It was as cold and hard as the tile floor beneath my feet. "You already did." I looked straight at her, waiting for her to meet my gaze, to see the wreckage she had co-signed. But for the first time in my life, my mother couldn't look me in the eye. That wasn't shame I saw in her averted gaze. It was the bitter disappointment of a failed mission. And I realized the silence she offered me in that office, that hollow, self-serving void, was the same silence that had defined my entire life. That night, I drove back to my childhood home in a daze. It wasn't my home anymore, not really. It was just a house. A suburban split level in a quiet Portland neighborhood that held the ghosts of a family that no longer existed. Greg was in a holding cell downtown. My mother was staying with a friend, too ashamed or too angry to face me. So I was alone, standing in the doorway of my old bedroom. The floral wallpaper was faded, the posters on the wall were of bands that hadn't been relevant in a decade, and the air was thick with the dust of memories I had tried so hard to leave behind. Lying on my childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling, the silence from the bank office followed me. It echoed in my head, morphing into all the other silences that had defined my life. That's the thing about trauma. It's not a single event. It's a pattern. A collection of moments, of tiny cuts that you ignore until one day you realize you're bleeding out. And lying there, the memories came back not as a gentle stream, but as sharp, jagged pieces of glass. A flash? I'm in Kandahar, Afghanistan. The air still tastes of dust and cordite. Our base had just been hit with a rocket attack. A screaming whistle followed by an earth-shattering boom that rattled your teeth in your skull. After the all clear, after the chaos died down and the ringing in my ears subsided, the first thing I did was find a satellite phone. My hands were still shaking. I just needed to hear my mother's voice. "Mom, it's me. I'm okay," I said, my voice hoarse, the connection crackling over thousands of miles. My heart was still hammering against my ribs. "There were just a few explosions, but our position is secure. I'm fine." I heard her exhale, a sharp burst of relief. "Oh, thank God, honey. We were so worried." There was a pause, but it wasn't a comforting one. It was the pause of a mind changing gears. "Hey, listen, did you get your combat pay yet? That hazard duty bonus? Greg needs a little help getting some new tools for a job he's lining up. Could you wire some of it home?" I went completely still. The sounds of the base, the shouts of other soldiers, the hum of generators, it all faded away. I had just survived a mortar attack. I had just watched the sky rain fire. And the first thought in her head wasn't about my safety, but about Greg's finances. In that moment, 7,000 miles from home, I realized I wasn't her daughter on the front lines. I was an ATM in a combat zone. Another piece of glass. I'm back in Portland, on leave. It was the first dinner after I'd been promoted to sergeant. I was so proud. I'd spent a little extra on a nice bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir to celebrate. I walked in and placed my service cap with its new, crisp chevrons on the entryway table. It felt heavy with responsibility and accomplishment. "Mom, Greg," I announced, a wide smile on my face. "I got promoted." My mother gave me a brief, distracted smile, the kind you give a stranger in a grocery store. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she said, before immediately turning to Greg, her eyes lighting up. "Sweetheart, you have to tell Layla about the new flooring contract you landed. It's fantastic." For the rest of the dinner, they talked. They talked about oak versus maple, about polyurethane finishes and baseboard installation. Not once did they ask me about my new responsibilities. Not one question about the soldiers now under my command, the lives that I was now partially responsible for. My promotion, a milestone I had worked tirelessly for, was just a footnote in the larger, more important story of their lives. A detail to be mentioned in passing in the Christmas letters she wrote to distant relatives. Letters full of pride for her hero daughter. But not something worthy of a real conversation at her own dinner table. My father, a Marine through and through, had raised me on a simple creed. Family is a unit. You protect your flank, you cover your people. He was the anchor of our unit. After he died, that unit dissolved. Greg drifted in, and the rules of engagement changed. The mission was no longer mutual support. The mission was protecting Greg. And my mother became his commanding officer, with me as her primary source of logistical and financial support. I tried to warn her once. We were in the kitchen, the air smelling of the Sunday roast chicken that always felt more like an obligation than a celebration. "Mom," I started, my voice low. "I don't trust him. There's something off." She waved her hand dismissively, not even looking up from the potatoes she was peeling. "You're just being rigid, Layla. The Army's trained you to be suspicious of everything. He's a good man. Give him a chance." She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I deserve to be happy, don't I?" And there it was. Her happiness, a project built on the foundation of my silence, my compliance. My role in the family wasn't to be a daughter, it was to be a silent partner in her pursuit of a life she felt she was owed. I didn't join the Army just to follow in my father's footsteps. I joined to breathe, to escape to a place where dedication was measured in action, not empty words. A place where loyalty was a two-way street. The military gave me structure, purpose, and most importantly, it gave me distance. I was naive enough to believe that distance would protect me, but I was wrong. The terrible truth that settled on me in that quiet, dusty room was that they didn't need me physically present to exploit me. They just needed my name, my social security number, and a mother who was willing to look the other way. I rolled onto my side, the old mattress springs groaning in protest. I couldn't just go back to Fort Bragg. I couldn't pack my duffel bag and leave this mess behind, pretending it didn't happen. This wasn't some distant skirmish anymore. The war had come home. This was my battle to fight, my honor to reclaim. If you've ever had a moment where you felt invisible to the people who were supposed to see you most clearly, please support this story by hitting the like button. And let me know in the comments by simply writing, "I see you." Because sometimes that's all we ever needed to hear. Lying there, a cold resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. This was a mission I had to see through to the end. But for the first time in my military career, I had no orders, no intelligence, no backup. What do I do now? The question lingered in the silence of my childhood room. What do I do now? In the Army, there's always a protocol, a field manual, a chain of command. But here, in this personal war, I was a soldier without a map. So I did the only thing I knew how. I created my own mission. My authorized leave from Fort Bragg wasn't a vacation anymore. It was a deployment. Operation Reclaim My Life. My uniform changed. Instead of camouflage ACUs, I wore jeans and a plain t-shirt, trying to blend in, to become an anonymous civilian in a city that no longer felt like home. Instead of my M4 rifle, my weapon became a worn leather briefcase, growing heavier each day with printed bank statements, credit reports, and notarized affidavits. The discipline of military life was the one thing I could cling to. Every morning at 0500 hours, I was up. Coffee brewed, bed made with perfect hospital corners, and then straight to the mission. My forward operating base became the Multnomah County Central Library in downtown Portland. I'd find a carrel in a quiet corner and spend hours hunched over a public computer, the fluorescent lights overhead humming a monotonous tune. I researched identity theft statutes, consumer protection laws, and legal precedents for fraud cases involving military personnel. The language was dense, a chaotic jungle of legal jargon, so different from the direct, unambiguous language of the military. I felt like I was learning a foreign language under extreme duress. Every hour, on the hour, I'd grant myself a 5-minute tactical pause. I'd walk to the large windows overlooking Pioneer Courthouse Square, Portland's living room. I'd watch people going about their normal lives, laughing with friends, sipping coffee from local cafes, complaining about the persistent drizzle. They were living in a world I no longer recognized, a world without this crushing weight on their shoulders. I was fighting for the right to rejoin them, to simply exist without this battle raging inside me. Lunch was a solitary affair, usually a meatball hero from bunk sandwiches devoured quickly on a cold park bench, my eyes scanning the crowds, feeling utterly detached from everyone. Each night, I'd return to the house, to my small bedroom, and spread the day's intelligence across the faded floral rug. I organized the documents with military precision, creating color-coded files, drawing flowcharts, connecting the dots between loan applications and cash withdrawals. I was building an intel map, a clear picture of the enemy's tactics. It was the one part of this whole mess that I could control. I remembered the Ranger motto my father so admired: Rangers lead the way. In this lonely fight, I realized I had to be my own ranger. I had to lead myself. One afternoon, as the gray Portland sky wept a steady, miserable rain, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read SGT Miller. For a second, a wave of warmth washed over me. Miller was my closest friend on my team at Fort Bragg, a loud, funny guy from Texas who could make you laugh even during the worst field exercises. "Vance," he boomed, his voice crackling with energy. "The platoon misses you. When are you coming back so we can all lose to you on the next PT test?" In the background, I could hear them, the familiar, boisterous sounds of my squad, the clatter of trays, the deep laughter, the friendly insults being tossed around. They were in the mess hall, the DFSC, getting ready for night training. A sharp, painful mix of envy and profound loneliness twisted in my gut. They were my family, my real family. And they were 3,000 miles away. The brotherhood I relied on felt like it was on another planet. "Hey, Miller," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel into my voice. "I'm still handling some family stuff." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. "Tell the guys I said hi." "Will do, Sergeant. Hurry back." I ended the call and the silence of the room rushed back in, heavier and more oppressive than before. It felt like the walls were closing in. I was home, but I had never felt more deployed, more isolated from everything that mattered. My research led me to one name that kept appearing on veterans' legal aid websites: Diane Miller. No relation to my friend, but her profile described her as a bulldog, a former JAG officer who now specialized in financial fraud cases against service members. Her office was in a sleek downtown skyscraper that felt a world away from my library carrel. Diane was a woman in her 60s with a short, severe haircut and eyes that didn't offer sympathy. They demanded facts. I laid out my intel map on her polished mahogany table. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable as she examined each document. When I finished, she finally spoke, her voice crisp and direct. "The evidence is overwhelming, Sergeant," she said. "The pattern of deception is clear. But this process won't be fast, and it won't be cheap. My initial retainer is $5,000. $5,000. My breath caught in my throat. That was nearly every penny I had in my savings account. It was the money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a new truck, a Ford F-150, just like my dad used to drive. It was my one tangible goal, a symbol of the stable future I was building for myself. I didn't hesitate. I pulled my debit card from my wallet and slid it across the table. It felt like I was handing over a piece of my soul. This was the first bullet fired in my war, and it was paid for with the very money I had earned through sweat, homesickness, and missed holidays. Greg had stolen my future, and now I had to use my past to buy it back. For that entire week, my mother was a ghost in her own home. She'd leave for work before I woke up and come home long after I'd retreated to my room. We moved through the same space like silent, orbiting planets, never colliding. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I met her in the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the living room. "Aren't you going to say anything to me?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. She wouldn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on a small crack in the plaster on the wall, as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. "My lawyer said I shouldn't speak to you without him present." Her voice was cold, detached, clinical. My lawyer. Not our lawyer. My lawyer. She had chosen a side. It wasn't a panicked choice made in a bank office. It was a calculated, conscious decision. She had been given a choice between her daughter and her partner in deceit, and she had made her allegiance clear. The finality of it was like a door slamming shut in a long, dark hallway. And in that moment, I knew. I was completely and utterly alone in this fight. The loneliness had become a physical weight. After a week of navigating the cold, sterile world of legal documents and silent hallways, I felt myself starting to fray at the edges. My resilience, the very thing the Army had forged in me, was being worn down to a thin, brittle wire. One particularly bleak afternoon, with the Portland rain drumming a melancholic rhythm against the window panes, I found myself in a Stumptown coffee roasters downtown. The rich smell of roasting coffee beans and the gentle hum of the espresso machine created a small pocket of warmth in my otherwise frigid world. I was staring blankly at a stack of legal papers, the words blurring into meaningless shapes on the page. I was exhausted. Not just tired, but a deep, soul-level exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. I had my guard up so high, I barely noticed the world around me. "Layla Vance, is that you?" The voice was bright and familiar, cutting through the fog of my fatigue. I looked up, blinking. Standing there was Sarah, my best friend from high school. We'd been inseparable until I enlisted, and life pulled us in different directions. She was a nurse now, but she looked exactly the same. The same radiant smile that could light up a room, the same intelligent, expressive eyes. Before I could even process it, she was beaming. "Oh my God, look at you, still looking like a total badass." And then she wrapped me in a hug. It wasn't a hesitant, polite hug. It was a genuine, warm, all-encompassing embrace. And that simple act of human kindness, after weeks of feeling like a ghost, nearly made me break down right there in the middle of the coffee shop. I hugged her back, burying my face in her shoulder for a second just to anchor myself. We found a small table in the corner, and for the next hour, the story just poured out of me. It wasn't the clinical, factual report I'd given the police or my lawyer. This was different. With Sarah, I wasn't Sergeant Vance, the soldier handling a crisis. I was just Layla, her friend, a daughter who had been deeply hurt. I didn't have to be strong. I didn't have to maintain my military bearing. I told her everything: the bank, the lies, the look in my mother's eyes, the crushing silence in the house. When I finally finished, my voice raspy with emotion, Sarah didn't offer any of the empty platitudes I had been dreading. "No, everything happens for a reason," or "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger." She just reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm and steady. She looked me straight in the eye, her expression full of a powerful, validating empathy. "I get it," she said softly. 2 simple words. My stepdad tried to do the same thing with my credit cards when I was in college. Not on the same scale, but that feeling of being betrayed by someone who's supposed to protect you. I get it. I get it. Those 2 words were more healing than 1,000 pieces of advice. They broke through the thick wall of isolation I had built around myself. Suddenly, I wasn't the only person in the world this had happened to. I wasn't crazy. My pain was real, and it was seen. For the first time, I felt a crack in the ice that had frozen around my heart. The next day, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Okay, no more sad park bench sandwiches for you," she said, her voice cheerful but firm. "My husband Mark and I are making lasagna tonight. Be at our place at 7. And that's not a request, it's an order." I tried to refuse, mumbling something about not wanting to impose, but she wouldn't hear it. That evening, I found myself standing on the porch of their small, cozy craftsman house in southeast Portland. The moment I stepped inside, I was enveloped by the incredible smell of garlic, oregano, and slow-simmered tomato sauce. Mark, a firefighter with a kind face and a handshake that could crush a walnut, greeted me at the door. "It's an honor to meet you, Sergeant," he said, his smile genuine. "Sarah told me what's going on. You're a damn hero. Just consider this place home, okay?" They didn't press me for details about the case. They didn't pepper me with questions. Instead, we talked about their work, about old movies we all loved, about the Portland Timbers' chances of making the playoffs. We just existed, 3 people sharing a meal. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I laughed. A real, deep, belly laugh. It felt foreign and wonderful. As I was getting ready to leave, Mark pressed a Tupperware container into my hands. "Lunch for tomorrow," he said with a wink. Sarah walked me to the door and gave me another hug. "Hey," she said, her voice serious now. "Don't stay in that house anymore. Our guest room is just collecting dust. I'm serious, Layla. It's no trouble at all." She looked at me intently. "A soldier needs a safe home base, right?" A safe home base. The word struck me right in the chest, knocking the wind out of me. It was the most fundamental duty of a family. To be the safe place you retreat to when the world is hostile. My own family, my own blood, had failed that basic mission. But here, in the home of a friend I hadn't seen in a decade, and her husband I'd just met, people who owed me nothing, I had found it. I politely declined her offer to stay. This was a battle I needed to see through on my own terms, from my own childhood bedroom. It felt like a strategic position I couldn't abandon. But as I walked to my car that night, the cold Portland air didn't seem so biting. The emptiness inside me had been filled with the warmth of their kindness, the comforting weight of leftover lasagna in my hands. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I was no longer a lone soldier fighting a forgotten war. I had reinforcements. It gave me the strength I needed for whatever came next. The warmth from my evening with Sarah and Mark lingered for a few days, a small glowing ember in the cold landscape of my life. It was a reminder that kindness existed, that I wasn't entirely alone. But like any ember, it needed oxygen to survive, and the call from my mother a few days later felt like a deliberate attempt to snuff it out. Her voice on the phone was different. It wasn't the cold, clinical tone she'd used in the hallway. This was a new tactic. This voice was tired, fragile, and laced with a carefully measured dose of regret. "Layla," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can we meet? Just us. At the original hotcake house. Like we used to when you were a little girl." The hotcake house. The mention of it was a calculated strike, aimed directly at my memories. It was our place. The place my dad would take me on Saturday mornings, and the place my mom continued the tradition for a few years after he was gone. It was a place of sticky maple syrup, fluffy pancakes, and a time when I still believed my mother was on my side. Against all logic, against the stern warnings from my lawyer Diane, against the screaming instinct in my own gut, a tiny, stupid flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe the shock had worn off. Maybe she finally understood. Maybe she wanted to fix this. Maybe she wanted her daughter back. So I agreed. I went there still hoping to meet my mother, not the stranger who had sat beside me in that bank. The diner was exactly as I remembered it, a chaotic symphony of clattering plates, sizzling bacon, and the cheerful chatter of families. The air hung thick with the sweet smell of syrup and the slightly burnt aroma of diner coffee. It was an atmosphere of manufactured happiness, a stark, painful contrast to the dead silence that fell between us the moment I slid into the red vinyl booth across from her. She looked smaller, older. Dressed in a faded gray cardigan, she seemed to have aged a decade in a week. She was staring into a mug of black coffee, her hands wrapped around it as if for warmth, endlessly stirring the dark liquid with a small spoon. Clink, clink, clink. I haven't been sleeping, Layla, she began, her voice as weary as she looked. She didn't meet my eyes. I'm so worried about Greg. He's not eating. He's just broken. He truly regrets what he did. She spoke for several minutes, her voice a low, mournful monologue. She painted a vivid picture of their suffering, her sleepless nights, Greg's fragile health, her crippling fear of losing their house, their life. It was a masterclass in deflection. There was not a single question about me. Not one, how are you holding up? Not one inquiry about my career, my future, the $60,000 mountain of debt that was still legally tied to my name. The story was entirely about them, their pain, their consequences. I listened, my hope flickering and dying with each word. I finally understood. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was a recruitment mission, and I was the target. My lawyer, she said, the word my sharp and divisive, spoke to Diane. He said you're being very firm. The accusation was subtle, wrapped in a blanket of sorrow. Honey, he's your stepfather. Greg made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but family is supposed to be about forgiveness. Don't you remember what Father Michael at St. Michael's always said? Love thy enemy. Greg isn't even your enemy. She finally looked up, her eyes watery and pleading. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was cold. Can't you just talk to your lawyer? Ask her to soften things? Drop a few of the charges. For me, Layla. Her grip tightened. You wouldn't let your own mother end up on the street at her age, would you? It was an all-out assault. She was using every weapon in her arsenal: motherly love, religious guilt, financial fear, family obligation. Every word was a carefully aimed shot, designed to penetrate my defenses and hit the soft, vulnerable parts of me that still wanted to believe in her. I could feel the old programming kicking in, the ingrained instinct to smooth things over, to take the burden, to be the good daughter. But I just sat there, listening in silence, a cold, creeping numbness spreading through my veins. I looked at my mother, at this woman who was playing the part of a fragile victim. And for the first time, I didn't see weakness. I saw a master manipulator. A seasoned accomplice who knew exactly which buttons to push, which levers to pull to make me yield. She had spent a lifetime installing them, after all. She must have sensed my resistance because she went for the final blow. The kill shot. You're a soldier, Layla, she said, her voice now carrying a note of quiet reverence as if she were paying me a compliment. You're strong. You can handle this. She paused, letting the words sink in. But Greg and I, we can't. And there it was. The exact same logic from the bank. The same twisted reasoning that had haunted me for weeks. My strength wasn't a quality to be admired, it was a resource to be exploited. My resilience wasn't a virtue, it was a justification to sacrifice me. I was the load-bearing wall in the crumbling house of her life, and she was telling me it was my duty to stand firm, even if it meant I would be crushed under the weight. Something inside me snapped, not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, clean break. The part of me that had been waiting for an apology, for a sign of remorse, simply ceased to exist. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled my hand out from under hers. The sudden absence of her touch was a relief. I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my wallet, and laid a crisp $20 bill on the table to cover our coffees. I have to go, I said. My voice was eerily calm, steady. The storm was on the inside. I have to make a phone call. I slid out of the booth, not waiting for her response. As I walked away, I could feel her eyes on my back, a mixture of shock and fury. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, past the families and the laughter, out of the cloying sweetness of the diner and into the cold, clean air. The phone in my pocket felt heavy with purpose. I burst out of the diner, the cool, damp afternoon air hitting my face like a slap. It was a welcome shock, clearing my head of the cloying sweetness and suffocating manipulation I'd left behind. A hot, furious energy surged through me. I didn't drive back to the house. I couldn't. Instead, I got in my car and just drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, taking the winding roads up into the West Hills. I needed space. I needed altitude. I needed to breathe air that she hadn't poisoned with her words. I ended up at Washington Park, pulling into a scenic overlook. Below me, the entire city of Portland was spread out, a sprawling map of bridges, buildings, and rivers, the lights just beginning to twinkle on as dusk settled in. The sheer scale of it all should have made my problems feel small, insignificant, but it didn't. It just made them feel contained, a specific battlefield I could finally see with perfect clarity. The anger that had propelled me up the hill began to cool, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. My mother was never going to change. She had chosen her path, and it was a path paved with excuses and justifications, with Greg at her side. I could no longer walk that path with her, foolishly hoping she would eventually take a different turn. I had tried, I had hoped, I had given her a chance to be my mother, and she had used that chance to try and weaponize my love for her against me one more time. Enough. I pulled out my wallet and slid out the old, creased photo of my father I always carried. It was his official Marine Corps portrait, him looking proud and impossibly young in his dress blues. I stared at his steady gaze, the hint of a smile on his lips. "You were wrong, Dad," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "You always said family was a fortress. But sometimes the enemy is already inside the gates." A gust of wind rustled through the tall Douglas firs surrounding the lookout, their scent clean and sharp. It sounded like a long, mournful sigh. "I'm so tired of being the strong one, Dad," I continued, the confession feeling like a heavy weight lifting off my chest. "I'm tired of being the one who can handle it. But I'm done. I won't let them define my strength as a weakness anymore. I won't let them turn my compassion into a weapon to be used against me." A strange sense of peace settled over me. The knot of turmoil in my stomach finally unwound. This was never just about the money. I knew that now. This was about my honor. The honor he had taught me about, and the honor I had sworn to uphold as a soldier. They had tarnished it. I had let them tarnish it. That was the thought that solidified everything. I finally made the call I told my mother I needed to make. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I scrolled through my contacts. I didn't call Sarah. I didn't call Miller. I called Diane, my lawyer. She answered on the second ring. "Diane, it's Layla Vance," I said. My voice was different now. The fatigue was gone, the hesitation had vanished. It was the voice of a sergeant giving an order. "I want you to proceed. Full force. Don't soften anything. Don't drop a single charge. I want you to go after this with everything we have." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of papers shuffling. "Are you sure, Layla?" Diane's voice was cautious. "This could get very difficult for your mother." "I'm sure," I replied, my gaze fixed on the city lights below. She chose her side. Now it's my turn to choose mine. I took a breath. And I choose me. After the call, I didn't leave right away. I sat there in my car, watching the sun finally dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brutal, beautiful shades of orange and purple. It was a cruel kind of beauty, a reminder that the world keeps turning, that sunsets keep happening, even when your own personal world is falling apart. It was a reminder that I had to keep turning too. Have you ever had that one moment, that final straw, where you knew you had to choose yourself? If you have, take a moment right now to hit that like button as a salute to your own strength. And in the comments, just write 2 words. I choose me. Let's fill the comments with that power. I placed my hand over my heart, feeling the strong, steady beat beneath my palm. It was a soldier's heart, a survivor's heart. And in the quiet of that Oregon evening, I made a vow. "I, Layla Vance," I said out loud, my voice carrying in the still air, a declaration to myself and the silent, watching trees. "Do solemnly swear that I will never again allow anyone, not even my own family, to treat my sacrifice as a convenience. I will not stand down. I will not be silent. I took one last deep breath of the cold night air. This mission will be accomplished. It was no longer a hope. It was no longer a plan. It was an order, and I was the one who was going to execute it. My vow at Washington Park wasn't made in the heat of the moment. It was a strategic decision. And every soldier knows that a decision is meaningless without a plan of execution. The first step was a tactical retreat. I called Sarah and accepted her offer. My childhood bedroom was no longer a safe house. It was enemy territory, filled with emotional landmines. I needed a secure location to plan my counteroffensive. At Sarah and Mark's house, I converted a corner of their cozy guest room into my new Tactical Operations Center. I went to an Office Depot and bought a large whiteboard, colored markers, and stacks of file folders. Back at the house, I started mapping out the battlefield. Squares for Greg, my mother, and each of the banks involved. Red arrows to track the flow of money from their accounts to their debts. Blue arrows to track the fraudulent loans taken in my name. Every loan, every date, every lie was documented and pinned to the board. The emotional chaos that had been churning inside me began to settle, replaced by the cold, clear logic of a mission plan. It was no longer a messy family drama. It was a campaign, with clear objectives, a known enemy, and a developing strategy. One evening, Mark came in with a couple of beers and whistled as he looked at the complex web of lines and notes on the board. "Looks like the invasion plan for Fallujah," he said, half joking. "Close," I replied, not taking my eyes off the board. "But the targets are softer." While studying the enemy's movements, I remembered a book my father had insisted I read before I left for basic training, Sun Tzu's The Art of War. One line had always stuck with me. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. I knew myself, but I needed to truly know my enemy, not just Greg's greed, but the depths of my mother's complicity. Diane, my lawyer, agreed. "We need more than just the loan documents, Layla," she'd said over the phone. "We need to establish a pattern of behavior. We need to prove intent." With a court order, Diane subpoenaed 5 years of my mother's complete financial records. When the box arrived, filled with a thick stack of bank statements, it felt like we had just received a critical intelligence drop. That weekend, Diane and I spread the documents across her conference table and went through them line by line, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of grim determination. And there it was, a clear, undeniable pattern. It started small. Small, steady transfers to Greg's account, labeled household expenses. Then came the larger, suspicious cash withdrawals, always just under the amount that would trigger an automatic report. And then, we found the smoking gun. 3 months before the first fraudulent loan was ever taken out in my name, my mother had taken out a $30,000 home equity line of credit on her house. The house my father had worked his entire life to pay off and leave to her, to us. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. She had already exhausted her own ammunition. She had bled her own resources dry to fund Greg's failures. And when she had nothing left to give, she had turned Greg's weapon on me. I wasn't the first resort. I was the last. As I was meticulously logging the dates of each transaction into a spreadsheet, my fingers froze over the keyboard. One of the largest personal loans, for $20,000, had a disbursement date that made my blood run cold. October 15th, my father's anniversary, the day he died. The memory of that day last year came rushing back. I had been on leave. I'd called my mother that morning, suggesting we go to the cemetery together, maybe lay some fresh flowers on his grave. She had declined, her voice sounding tired on the phone. "I'm just not feeling up to it today, honey," she had said. "I think I'm just going to stay home and have a quiet day." A quiet day. As it turned out, her quiet day had involved going to a bank with Greg, where they sat in an office just like the one I'd been in, and forged her daughter's name on a loan application. They had used the day we were meant to be honoring the memory of my father, a man of honor, a Marine, to commit a dishonorable crime. The hot rage I'd felt before was gone. In its place was something far colder, far harder. This was no longer just about money or betrayal. This was a desecration. It was an act of profound disrespect not only to me, but to the memory of the man she had once claimed to love. That evening, back at Sarah's, I started packing the last few boxes of my personal belongings that I'd brought from the house. Sorting through old books and memorabilia, my fingers brushed against a small forgotten object at the bottom of a box. It was a small silver digital voice recorder. My dad had given it to me for high school graduation to record my college lectures. And then, another memory surfaced. A conversation from a few years ago, before things had gotten this bad. Greg was in the middle of one of his frantic sales pitches, trying to convince me to invest in some can't-miss business opportunity involving imported power tools. I had refused, and the conversation had gotten heated. On a sudden, strange impulse that I didn't understand at the time, I had discreetly turned the recorder on in my jacket pocket. My heart started to pound. I spent the next hour digging through old memory cards until I found it. I plugged in my headphones, my hands shaking slightly, and pressed play. And there it was. His voice, slick and condescending, filled my ears. "You just don't get it, Layla. That's not how the real world works. Sometimes in business, you have to be a little flexible with the rules. Your mother gets it. She's always had my back." I hit pause, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. I replayed it, listening to the words again, confirming the clear implication of her knowledge, her complicity. I didn't hesitate. I picked up my phone and called Diane's personal cell number. It was late, but I knew she wouldn't mind. "Diane," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "It's Layla. I need you to add something to our evidence file." I took a breath. "I think I just found our silver bullet." The mediation was held in a high-rise law office overlooking the Willamette River. We sat in a sterile conference room, around a massive polished mahogany table that probably cost more than my first car. The air was thick with tension and the smell of expensive leather. Across from me and Diane sat the opposing force: Greg, my mother, and their lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit named Peterson. He had the kind of practiced, reassuring smile that instantly put me on high alert. I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't nervous. I was a soldier in position, waiting for the battle to begin, my ammunition ready. Peterson started, his voice smooth as silk, oozing a false sincerity that made my skin crawl. "We're here today to find a reasonable, amicable solution for everyone," he began, steepling his fingers. "My client, Mr. Vance, acknowledges some unwise financial decisions. But I want to be very clear that these actions were always motivated by a desire to provide for his family." He gestured vaguely toward me. "Sergeant Vance, as a valued member of that family, naturally has a role to play in supporting it through difficult times." At the mention of her cue, my mother dutifully nodded, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. Greg sat beside her, trying to look remorseful. A kicked puppy who had just chewed up the family Bible. They were performing a flawless play, and I had been cast as the ungrateful, unfeeling villain. I let them talk. I sat in perfect, disciplined silence as Peterson wove his narrative of misunderstandings and a breakdown in communication. He painted a picture of a well-intentioned stepfather and a loving, worried mother, hampered by a daughter who, due to her military training, was perhaps a bit too rigid, too black and white in her thinking. He was good. He was very good. When he finally finished his opening act, a smug sense of satisfaction on his face, I didn't respond. I just looked at Diane. She gave me a barely perceptible nod. Game on. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the first file, a thin manila folder. Without a word, I slid it across the polished table. It came to a stop directly in front of Peterson. "This," I said, my voice even and calm, cutting through the silence, "is a copy of my mother's home equity line of credit statement." I paused, letting him open the folder. She took out a $30,000 loan against the house my father left her, 3 months before the first misunderstanding involving my name ever occurred. I looked past him, directly at my mother. She knew he was drowning in debt. She knew he was desperate. I turned my gaze back to the lawyer. "This wasn't a breakdown in communication, Mr. Peterson. This was a calculated financial decision. Peterson's professional smile flickered. His eyes darted from the paper to my mother's face. I heard her draw a sharp, ragged breath beside him. The first crack in their fortress wall had appeared. "And there's more," I said, sliding a second, thicker folder across the table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. "This is a chronological list of the fraudulent loans taken out under my name, cross-referenced with their corresponding bank records." I leaned forward slightly. "I'd like to draw your attention to the transaction dated October 15th. Do you see it, Mr. Peterson? $20,000. I let the silence hang for a beat before delivering the payload. October 15th is the anniversary of my father's death. He was a decorated Marine. It was the one day my mother told me she was too grief-stricken to even leave the house. This time, I locked eyes with my mother. There was nowhere for her to run. "You used the day Dad died to defraud his daughter," I said, my voice dropping, each word a carefully placed stone. "Tell me, Mom, is that what supporting the family looks like?" The tears that came this time were real, but they were tears of panic, not sorrow. A choked sob escaped her lips. Greg went rigid in his chair, the color draining from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. The room was silent except for my mother's ragged breathing. This time, no one was buying the performance. Peterson, scrambling to regain control, held up a hand. "Now, this is all circumstantial. It's conjecture." "Then let's listen to something that isn't," Diane interjected smoothly. Her voice was pure ice. She calmly placed the small silver digital recorder on the center of the table. The silence in the room became absolute. Then she pressed play. Greg's voice, arrogant, slick, and undeniably his, filled the expensive air. "You just don't get it, Layla. That's not how the real world works. Sometimes in business, you have to be a little flexible with the rules. Your mother gets it. She's always had my back." Diane pressed the stop button. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a story collapsing, of a lie being executed. Diane folded her hands on the table. "That recording," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence, "combined with the financial evidence establishing a clear pattern of conspiracy, is more than enough for the district attorney to pursue felony charges against both of your clients for conspiracy to commit fraud." The play was over. The curtain had fallen. Peterson stared at the small silver recorder as if it were a venomous snake. He slowly looked at his clients, his face a mask of professional fury. Then he looked back at us, the last bit of smug confidence gone from his eyes. We need a few minutes," he stammered, his voice thin and defeated. The battle was over. And I had won. I stood up, my movements steady, and watched as Diane gathered our files. I had won. So why did I feel so empty? I always thought victory would taste sweet. In my fantasies, in the daydreams that got me through the long nights of research, I imagined a feeling of pure, triumphant vindication, a surge of righteous satisfaction. But as I walked out of that law office, leaving the wreckage of my family's lies behind me, the only thing I felt was a vast, hollow emptiness. The adrenaline of combat had faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. My body felt heavy, my mind bruised. Sarah and Mark had prepared a small celebratory dinner for me that night, complete with a bottle of champagne. I did my best to participate, to smile, and accept their congratulations, but it felt like I was watching myself from a distance. The laughter sounded hollow, the food tasted like cardboard. I had won. But the price of victory was my family. I had successfully defended my honor, but in doing so, I had to formally declare my own mother an enemy combatant. There's no glory in that. That night, sleep wouldn't come. It wasn't anger that kept me awake, staring into the darkness of Sarah's guest room. It was a deep, aching grief. A grief for the little girl inside me, who had never stopped hoping for the unconditional love she was supposed to get from her mother, and the quiet, painful acceptance that she never would. The war was over, but now I had to learn to live in the silence that followed. A few weeks later, the legal dust settled. Greg, faced with the undeniable evidence against him, took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. As part of the deal, he testified that my mother, while aware of his severe financial troubles, was not explicitly aware of the forgeries. His testimony, likely coached by his lawyer, was just enough to save her from jail time. Instead, she received 6 months of probation, a hefty fine, and a permanent mark on her record. Diane called it a dual victory. My name was cleared, my credit was being restored, and my mother had been spared prison. I didn't know how to feel. A part of me was undeniably relieved. The thought of my mother behind bars was something my heart couldn't quite bear. But another, colder part of me felt a familiar sting of injustice. It felt as though she had, once again, evaded true accountability. She wasn't the one holding the pen, but her silence, her willing ignorance, had been the fertile ground where Greg's crimes had grown. She called me about a month later. Her voice was thin and tentative. She asked if we could meet to talk. I agreed, knowing this was a conversation that had to happen. We met at Tom McCall Waterfront Park, a neutral space where the city came to breathe. We walked along the path, the Willamette River flowing fast and brown beside us, a powerful, indifferent current moving always in one direction. For a long time, we didn't speak, just watched the gray water churn. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," she finally said, but the words felt weak, like pebbles tossed into the roaring river. They made no impact. Then the old script began. The familiar refrain. But I truly didn't know everything he was doing. I just wanted to help him. Her voice cracked, and she turned to face me, her eyes pleading for an understanding I no longer had to give. "After everything I've done for you, Layla, raising you all by myself after your father died, how can you treat me like this? Can't you try to understand?" It was the ultimate weapon of a master manipulator, using the love and sacrifice of the past to erase the betrayals of the present. The old me would have crumbled. The old me would have felt the crushing weight of guilt and obligation. But I was no longer the old me. I stopped walking and looked out at the river, watching it flow, unstoppable, toward the sea. "I do understand, Mom," I said, and to my own surprise, I meant it. My voice was quiet, but firm. "I understand that you were lonely after Dad died. I understand that you were scared. I understand that Greg made you feel safe." I turned to look at her. "But your fear didn't give you the right to sacrifice me." It was the hardest truth I had ever spoken aloud. "I love you," I continued, and that was the most painful truth of all. It was a fact, an unbreakable bond of biology and memory that even this betrayal couldn't completely sever. I will probably always love the mother you were to me when I was a child, but I cannot have the person you are now in my life. Not right now. I saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by the familiar glint of panic. Tears began to well. "So that's it? You're just throwing me away?" "This isn't about throwing you away," I said, my voice steady, my resolve solid. "This is about setting a boundary. A real one. For the first time in my life." I took a breath. "Maybe someday we can talk again. But it will have to be on a foundation of truth, not excuses. And that's a path you have to walk on your own." I stepped forward and gave her one last hug. It was brief, awkward, a gesture more of closure than affection. The hug between two people who were family, but were now also strangers. Then I turned and I walked away. I didn't look back. I walked along the riverbank, each step feeling heavier than the last. I had won the war, drawn the boundaries, and spoken my truth. But as I watched the river flow relentlessly toward the sea, a question echoed in the emptiness inside me. Can a person truly heal when they've had to amputate a part of their own heart? Can I ever truly be happy again? The question that haunted me on the banks of the Willamette River, can I ever truly be happy again, didn't get answered overnight. Healing, I learned, isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a terrain you learn to navigate, day by day. It's a process of putting one foot in front of the other, even when you can't see the path ahead. A year has passed. I'm no longer in Portland, a city that holds too many ghosts for me now. I've been reassigned to Fort Hood, Texas. The endless blue skies and the sheer vastness of the landscape here have been a balm to my soul. On paper, my life is back in order. The fraudulent debts have been expunged from my record. My credit score is clean. My military career, once on the brink of ruin, is stable and secure again. But the most significant change isn't documented in any official file. It's the change within me. For a long time, I tried to bury what happened, to lock it away in a dark room in my mind and pretend it never existed. But the scars remained. And I realized that true healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about finding a new purpose for the pain. During my legal battle, I discovered just how common my story was. Countless service members, deployed far from home, with steady incomes and a deep-seated trust in family, become easy targets for financial exploitation. I saw a breach in our defenses, a weakness in the home front that left soldiers vulnerable. So, I did what a sergeant is trained to do. When you find a weak point in the line, you fortify it. I went to my commanding officer, and with the base chaplain's support, I started a new initiative. We call it Guardian Watch, a peer support group for service members who have become victims of financial fraud and family exploitation. Tonight is our first meeting. We're in a simple community room on base with fluorescent lights, mismatched chairs, and a pot of lukewarm coffee in the corner. More than a dozen soldiers are here, sitting in a loose circle. They are a cross-section of the Army itself. Fresh-faced privates barely out of high school, seasoned combat veterans with salt and pepper hair, and officers with crisp, pressed uniforms. They carry their stories with them. You can see it in their eyes. Stories of girlfriends who drained their bank accounts while they were in Iraq, of greedy relatives who took out credit cards in their names, of phony investment schemes pitched by people they were supposed to trust the most. I stand before them, not as a victim, but as a survivor. My voice is steady as I begin to speak, and I tell them my story. All of it. I don't leave out the ugly parts, the shame, the humiliation, the profound pain of my mother's betrayal. When I'm finished, a heavy silence fills the room. But it's not the silence of judgment I once feared. It's the silence of understanding, the quiet recognition of a shared wound. After a moment, a young private first class, a woman named Melissa, hesitantly raises her hand. Her eyes are shimmering with unshed tears. My own brother, she says, her voice trembling. He took my whole enlistment bonus, said he was investing it for me. She shakes her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. I just feel so stupid. I trusted him. The word stupid hangs in the air, a word I know every person in that room, including myself, has used to describe themselves. I walk over and pull up a chair, sitting down beside her, so we're at eye level. I look at her and I say the words I once desperately needed to hear myself. You are not stupid, Melissa, I say, my voice gentle but firm. You are trusting. There is a universe of difference between the two. The fault is not yours. The fault belongs to the one who broke that trust. I look around the circle, meeting the eyes of the other soldiers. And you are not alone. Not anymore. In here, we watch each other's backs. We are the guardians of our own. I see nods of agreement around the room. An invisible line of defense is being drawn, a bond forged not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet courage of shared vulnerability. The researcher Brené Brown says, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. In this room, we were all showing up. After the meeting, I walk back to my apartment under the vast Texas sky, filled with a sense of peace I haven't felt in years. I take out my phone and I call my mother. We've started talking again. The calls are short, cautious. They are not the easy, loving conversations of a mother and daughter, and maybe they never will be. But they are real. She's in therapy. She's trying. She's doing the work of walking her own path, just as I am walking mine. Our relationship, or what's left of it, is being rebuilt, slowly, on a new foundation of difficult, painful truth. I'm proud of you, Layla, she says near the end of our call. Her voice is quiet, stripped of all its old manipulations. It sounds, for the first time, authentic. And this time, I believe her. My story, the one that began in a cold bank office in Portland, ends here. But my mission, the one that began in this simple community room in Texas, is just getting started. I've learned that the ultimate victory isn't about defeating an enemy. It's about refusing to let them define who you are. It's about taking your deepest wounds and turning them into a shield for others. It's the victory won on the most important front of all, the home front. And this time, I am the one in command. Sharing this story wasn't easy, but silence is where shame grows, and I made a promise to myself that I would not be silent. My battle is over, but I know many of you might be fighting on your own home fronts. If my journey gave you even a small piece of strength today, please let it be known by hitting the like button. For the comments, I have one simple request. Share one word that describes your own source of strength. Let's fill this space with our collective resilience. Finally, subscribe to this channel to become part of a community where stories like ours are not just told, but honored. Thank you for bearing witness.